technologies. So, without further extension, I will introduce Birger from EHRbase. EHRbase is an openEHR implementation. He probably already know about it, and he will tell us what's new with EHRbase.
Thanks a lot. Can you hear me well? Perfect. All right, then let's get started. So first of all, it's really great that finally we have a track for the technology. We had many openEHR events where there was a focus on policy, especially targeting decision makers to show, okay, what are the possibilities of open platforms? And for this time, it's the first time that we have a technology track, and so I'm really humbled and happy that I can start having the first presentation. What I would like to show you today is our open source implementation of the openEHR standard, which is called EHRbase. And the basic mission is that we want to make openEHR available basically for everybody. Because when I started like 10 years ago, it wasn't super easy. You had to go through all the specifications, and there were some commercial products, a little bit of open source, but nothing that really worked out of the box. And so we said, okay, the goal is to make this really approachable and usable by vendors, hospitals, and any regional or national program that would like to adapt the standard. Let's say we didn't start out from scratch, so there were some developments coming before EHRbase. So there was an implementation called EHRbase, which was promoted by the Ripple Foundation from the United Kingdom. This had the drawback that it was rather a small team. I think the one developer, Christian Chevalier at that time, and openEHR is not the easiest technology, admittedly. So when we came to EHRbase, we built on the foundations of EHRsys, and we had different stakeholders joining the effort. On the one hand side, we had Hannover Medical School and the HIMED Consortium, which now consists of 10 university hospitals and 4 hospitals to use open platforms for data exchange and reuse of data from routine for analytics. And on the other hand, vitagroup as an industry member that started building around 2018-19, building a platform strategy. And because there were some personal connections, we teamed up and had a joint development team between the public sector and the commercial sector. So some words about scope and technology. I think the first message is it's quite commercially friendly. We are using Apache 2 licenses, which means that you can basically use EHRbase for whatever you like. It's built on modern technology, so we really try to keep it up to date. So we have recent versions of Java, the recent version of Spring Boot, which was a bit of effort to get there from version 2 to version 3. It's highly relying on the Postgres API and the Postgres database, some Juke, and we are also using the Archie library from the colleagues of NEDAP, which is the openEHR reference model. So many thanks to that. Without it, it would be much, much harder. And the design scope, this is also quite important. We are not building an analytics platform like a data lake or so. It's really about building day-to-day transactional systems where you can build clinical application systems upon, or your electronic medical record regional systems. So what kind of functionality do we support? All the good and basic stuff of the openEHR specifications. There's a reference model. There is the archetype definition language for the archetypes and templates in the OPT format. And also quite important, the openEHR REST API, also in a very recent version. Then we have the web template format, which was innovated by Better and has now become something like the de facto standard for the development experience of openEHR. And so we basically build our own implementation, which is also available in our openly available software development kit. So that this standard, which makes the whole specification a bit more approachable for front-end developers, is also part of our tech stack. And once it becomes part of the official specification, it will also be part of the official REST API. Then we have some other nice things like data validation, automatically based on templates. And as a nice extra, you can also connect to your FHIR terminology service, if you have any annotations with LOINC or SNOMED, then the system can automatically test if you are if you are violating any constraints provided by your clinical experts. And then, also quite important, one of the, I think, centerpieces of the specification, we have a full implementation of the archetype query language, which means no matter if you are querying a system from one vendor or the other vendor, you can get the same data based on the data models. So this is why it's super important for the portability of apps that a decent implementation of the openEHR standard specification has also an AQL query language representation. So I think for the people who are a bit more familiar with openEHR, who have been a bit around, so this was the boring part. For everybody who's a bit new, I think this is quite interesting information. Now we are jumping a little bit to a more technical thing, because we have been building a new AQL engine as part of EHRbase, and I want to show some highlights, which the technical people who have a bit more history with openEHR might appreciate a bit more than the rest of the audience. So bear with me, we might take a look at that. So this is the archetype query language, and in some implementations we have been seeing, there was a limitation concerning the objects that you can retrieve from your electronic health record, like the clinical entry. What is being shown here, admittedly a bit verbose, is that there is something like the feeder audit object. So this is some sort of logging of where the data comes from, if it's being imported from an HS7 version 2 message or maybe from a FHIR resource. And now, this is new, you can directly use these objects to provide filter criteria, no matter what kind of clinical entries you are searching. So if you have any message and an ID, you can find the appropriate and according database entry in EHRbase. Was a bit of effort, but I think super handy for multiple integration scenarios, especially if you, for example, want to update your data and you don't know, okay, where exactly did I put my feeder audit object into the hierarchy? So you will find it without any issue. So quick presentation, how this looks like in the REST API. So there is the query, and then afterwards we see the result set. We have the ID of our composition and get the feeder audit object and see how the data came into the system using FHIR. So it's really easy to obtain this kind of information with the new AQL engine. So another thing that's quite nice, maybe a bit special, but I really like it, is that before you had to decide, okay, what am I searching for? Is it like a clinical observation? Is it a clinical order? Is it a clinical action? And you had to be a bit more specific what kind of observation it is. Is it maybe a blood pressure? Is it your body weight? And in the new version, it's completely freestyle. You can search on any clinical entry without further doing so. It's a really nice shortcut. So you get all the care entries. Again, for the ones who have been working with that, I think it's quite nice because we can really work on these abstract classes and have really efficient expression how we query the data. So again, using the REST API. And then you will see that for this patient, you will get basically all the entries that are in the patient record. Of course, depending on the size of your record, might take a bit longer because you're fetching hundreds or thousands of results. But now this is easily possible using the new engine. So we have a growing user base, which is really nice to see. And I'm really proud that we also have national programs already using EHRbase. So we have the National Digital Platform of Scotland, and Paul Miller will give a presentation, I think, in the policy track later today. So you might not want to miss that one. We got aware that there is now a proof of concept for Ireland for a national record, which is also using EHRbase. So this was really nice to see. And we haven't been involved at all. So this is something that just pops up occasionally. And this is really what makes it fun when you are open sourcing something. It's just getting picked up and can be used even by national programs. Then we have two projects in the area of prompts. So Open Outcomes is one initiative from the Aperta Foundation in the UK. And they have, for the orthopedy, one patient-reported outcome platform. But I think it's quite extensible and they built this one on EHRbase as well. And then there's also a PROM project in the context of the Catalunya project, where the open source version of EHRbase was used. The record or the infrastructure itself is based on a, let's say, commercial flavor of the EHRbase, which is called tipcdr, but I will come to that in a second. And then there is also some activity in the Indian community. So there's MetBlocks, and so that will give the next presentation. So we have really good collaboration on that, and we are learning quite a lot. And then there's also Karkinos in the area of cancer care that's also using EHRbase for specific purposes. I think they're doing some registry building based on EHRbase. So this is not comprehensive. There are more users, and it's really nice to see new users popping up at the time and nurturing the community around EHRbase. Oh, sorry, forgot Future Perfect, British company, also doing some work, I think right now in Northern Ireland, with integrating some data from Epic, if I'm not mistaken. So then finally, because I'm also now, let's say, from a commercial background, but also still a bit academic, but I want to point out what EHRbase can do for you, but maybe where some limitations or what we think is some nice addition. With EHRbase, you're getting really the foundations of openEHR, so it's all around the specification. So you have the, as mentioned, reference model, the archetype definition language, the REST API, and of course, basic services like authorization, the software development kit, and it's basically a good working openEHR system. Typically, you will have to integrate into enterprise environments like university hospitals, regions, and all kinds of complicated scenarios, where it's really important to get up to speed and have, let's say, all the security and performance requirements. And so this is why, let's say, to make it sustainable and viable, we have complemented EHRbase with a commercial offering, which is called tipcdr, which is, for example, providing a whole set of services based on a Kubernetes platform, so highly scalable, plus a distributed database approach to Postgres, which is called EHRbase, so you can really scale out with millions of records, billions of compositions, clinical data inside your system. And things like access control, which is important, some integration capabilities for HL7 version 2 and FHIR in both directions, and the logging of this ADNA from IHE, so that you have the full audit trailing of who's accessing the data and processing the data, and also modern approaches like AMQP for the integration with other services in the cloud environment. Then I want to give a quick glance on the roadmap. So next year, it's finally happening. We are at version, I think, 0.32 or so, and it's already working very well, but there will be the 1.0 release where we say it's all done in a way that all the engineers are happy about it. Thanks. So I'm not sure if you have different backgrounds in pop culture, but you know, there's some things like Chinese Democracy from Guns N' Roses takes forever, or Cyberpunk 2077 takes forever, or other projects that just don't seem to finish, but we are finally getting there, and it's ready when it's done. But now we are super confident that we say that's it. And of course, this means that from this point on, there will always be the migration path when there's a new version. Before that, typically we have automated migrations. So we do that, but there was no guarantee. But with the 1.0, we feel obligated to always provide a proper path to update your system and give this promise. Then we will have some additional features like AQL on folders, which might be nice for episodes of care. And the tags is something that's a new part of the specification in openEHR, which you can provide some more meta information about your clinical data, for example, a confidentiality level, which might be interesting for access control in your system. And then finally, for Catalunya, this might be a bit, let's say, wobbly, because now the innovation project is about to start. We will have to talk about distributed versioning. And I think we will start small because it's a complicated topic, admittedly, and also has some implications regarding governance. So who's allowed to push your data, who's allowed to maybe overwrite your data. And so this has to be considered and will be part of the EHRbase as well when it comes to the openEHR part of the whole technology stack. So I got 50 minutes to present. Hopefully I'm good on time. And if you have any questions, let me know. Afterwards also we can have a coffee and discuss. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to any questions you might have right now. Thank you.
Questions? I see a hand.
Thanks for a really interesting talk. I'm quite new to openEHR and EHRbase, but looking at your strings in AQL, I was wondering how you protect against SQL injection attacks.
Yeah, I mean, in the end, it's something that's depending on your technology stack. What we are doing, so I'm not a developer, but I will try to hopefully make it as accurate as possible. And maybe Alex sitting down there, he's a product owner, might roll his eyes if I'm doing a mistake, but bear with me. So my understanding is that right now it's all going through object relational mapping tools like Juke, which has some sort of sanitizing. I think we have also some custom sanitizing for the AQL injection. So we are taking definitely measures to avoid that. And I mean, what we are basically doing is there is a grammar in background, and so this is the first thing that you have to have something that's properly AQL. And in the background, the AQL is transformed into SQL queries. So this gives you the second stage of, let's say, sanitization possibilities. What should be inside, what should not be inside, because it's quite clear what's part of the openEHR AQL and what's not, right?
You also have that parameterized AQL, so probably you can also sanitize at that level with parameters in AQL.
Yes, yeah, for sure. And I mean, there's also, let's say, always this, let's say, tension between doing any freestyle AQL queries on a production system or using the stored queries system where you have to predefine and then just parameterize at runtime what is executable. And I think this is what typically should be done, so that not a client system starts sending their own AQLs whenever they like, but having some sort of contract between the platform and the client, what kind of queries are allowed.
More questions?
Thanks for all of that, and obviously all the work that has gone into it. It is a massive amount of work, and you really deserve appreciation for all of that. I couldn't help notice the distributed transaction item. Yeah, and I was wondering, because this is something, whenever you try to scale, you can't avoid it. So I was wondering if you did that at a level, you just delegated that to the underlying distributed Kubernetes Postgres stack, or is it something explicit at the API level?
Okay, you mean really about distributed transactions in microservice architectures, this kind of thing?
Well, I'm meaning whatever you put on the screen. Basically, in the HipCDR architecture, in the features, you had an item that says distributed transactions.
Okay, sorry. Then do you mean this one?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, we have on this right-hand side like 40 to 50 services that are interacting. And so, for example, you have the so-called CDR bridge, which is like the facade for receiving FHIR and version 2 messages. And sometimes you will ask different services like our demographics server and sometimes EHRbase to do something in the systems. And then you have always the problem, if one system fails doing the transaction, then you have to roll back. So this is why we spend quite some amount of work on doing this Saga pattern implementation, which also means some custom APIs where you can really do a distributed rollback across all the services in the platform, which is not something that's sometimes super obviously to customers, but if you're a bit knowledgeable about it, you will really appreciate that it's there, but it's really not that sexy, to be honest. But it's there, and we are really proud of that. Yeah.
No, for a small number of people in this room, it's extremely sexy, but let's not get into that. Thank you. Thanks for the explanation. Thanks.
Okay.
Is there more other questions? Okay.
You mentioned the EHRsys development team was about one person. What's the size of your development team?
Yeah, it's a typical size of one Scrum team for, let's say, the openEHR core part. The overall platform is like 25 to 30 people for product engineering. So it's quite big. But in the core, I would say like 7, 8 people are working on the core which is really the AQL engine and the transformations between flat formats and these kind of things. So it's really the EHRbase core. And so I think there's lots of benefit coming from this, let's say, commercial aspect, also what's going back into the open source. So we are really doing this on a, let's say, professional basis, and it's not like a hobby project. So I think that's what I would like to emphasize, because it's healthcare data, and we really think it needs to be industry strengths. But at the same time, of course, it's not a surprise. In the end, it needs to be a sustainable business model. And so we think it's really good because you can easily get started. But of course, we want to have some added value for, let's say, large-scale installations and also for mission-critical environments.
Yeah. I have one more question, very quick. If you'll welcome more help on the EHRbase, because it's an open source project, what are the domain? What are the things that you think you should, have more people on?
In the open source domain, I think we are doing quite fine. So that's not the thing. So what I would love to see is some sort of public demonstrator, because now you've seen slides and some, let's say, backend stuff. But I think it would be really nice to see some publicly available applications running on top to make it a bit more easy to grasp from an, let's say, non-backend developer perspective. So just to, make this really approachable by everybody. So the others is missing, but I think otherwise we are doing quite well.
Okay. Thank you, Birger.
Thank you so much.
It just happens to be the next presentation is actually about apps built on EHRbase also.